So, we're jumping back into the thick of it with even more Astora Straight Sword slander. Not only because that last video was my best performing ever, but also because I wanted to take a real crack at breaking the weapon down more objectively, without so much hyperbole muddying what I had to say about it. And of course, it's another reason to put... Hold on. What? 1 second. Man, I expected this intro to be much longer. Sorry. Okay, stalling. Let's see how much longer I can get this to go before we have to reach the limit. We're almost there. And 1 minute. We've got another flimsy excuse to put ass in the thumbnail again. Howdy, I'm Prakuza, and welcome to DevBox, where today I want to take a minute to more closely examine a previous claim I made about the Astora Straight Sword being the worst weapon in Dark Souls, settling on my final conclusion that it was indeed worse than you think. In addition, I want to compare the original version of the weapon to the updated version in Dark Souls 3 that is somehow made even worse in some obvious ways for casual fans and a much more subtle way for me in the making of this video specifically. In that case, this video will be divided into two sections. A breakdown using my normal video essay format to describe exactly what my personal problems with the ass in DS1 are, followed by a run-through of the game using the ass in DS3 to showcase the changes that sully the weapon even further, for me at least. So, if you're here for something akin to a challenge run using an unoptimized build, then head to the timecode on screen right now, or find the Run Start chapter. That being said, these two parts are enough of a tandem exercise to warrant being combined into a single video, and as such, the viewing experience is much more complete when you don't skip the opening video essay. What would you call the selling point of Dark Souls? I don't mean what marketing gimmick first got your attention, or how you would make a trailer for the game now. I mean, when you tell your friends to give the game a try, what do you tell them about in order to get them interested? For me, I might mention the exploration, the brutally challenging but ultimately fun bosses, but the thing that I tend to focus on for people who I think would be interested in the game, but might have been put off by the fear of that difficulty or the excessive hype that has built up over the years, is the build variety. There's a weapon for everyone, and every weapon can see you through to the credits. Well, most weapons. See, while the upgrade trees for the majority of weapons in Dark Souls do allow for a progression loop that can take you all the way from start to finish with a bandit knife, a hand axe, or a longsword, there are a few special weapons scattered throughout the game that draw the eye of new players, but fail to properly live up to that promise. As such, the community has come to referring to these weapons as noob traps, or noob bait. In opposition to your standard trash weapons, the whips, the nays, the fists, the broken straight swords, a noob trap is a relatively early weapon that boasts impressive stats in the early game, only for the weapon to fall off very quickly, usually before even reaching Sen's Fortress. These weapons also usually come with fairly low stat requirements, but a heavy resource investment in order to upgrade, implying that each upgrade will offer a massive power boost. However, for noob bait, this is simply not the case. One very prominent example is the Drake Sword, a weapon found from cutting the tail off of the Hellkite dragon that plagues the bridge on the way to the Sunlight Altar. And of course, there's our star of the show today, the Astora Straight Sword, which can technically be found as soon as players reach Lordran, although that does require starting with the Master Key, but would otherwise only appear on the standard path of progression after reaching the elevator out of Blighttown. But assuming that you did take the objectively correct starting gift decision and grab the Master Key, then it is available pretty much right off the bat. Although, collecting it does come with its own set of dangers. Now, before I start talking about everything wrong with the Astora Straight Sword, let's not overlook the pros that the weapon brings to the table. First, there is the aforementioned ease of acquisition. Basically, if you have the Master Key, you can pick it up without fighting anything at all. even if the zombie dragon might kill you for the trouble. The weapon is also very easy to get online, only requiring about 1,400 souls, 1,397 to be exact, for a cleric to wield it. Less than what you get for finishing the Undead Asylum. Most other classes hover around the 3,000 soul mark to get it online though, with Pyromancy and Sorcerer needing the most to get the weapon ready at 5,068 and 5,309 respectively. Secondly, the Astora Straight Sword is a blessed weapon, bearing divine damage, which means very little throughout most of the game, but does mean that it can permanently kill the skeletons in the catacombs, as well as in Nito's boss fight. Third, the weapon upgrades through Twinkling Titanite, which can be quickly found in Undead Burg and Darkroot Basin by killing 2 crystal lizards in order to immediately jump the weapon up to +3, a little over halfway through its entire progression line. However, rounding out the last 2 levels will either require waiting until Enerlanda to buy more Twinkling Titanite from the giant blacksmith, or heading into the Great Hollow and hunting the crystal lizards hiding in all of the extra nooks and crannies of the giant tree. Given that having access to Astora Straight Sword also implies access to the Great Hollow, this does mean that it can technically be fully upgraded as soon as you pick it up. Fourth, it comes with the Longsword moveset, a favorite for many among the various movesets in DS1. The whole moveset has a great mix of strength and speed for decent DPS, but also has quite a bit of crowd control with its wide swings. However, my personal favorite part of the equation is the thrust that comes from the one-handed R2. Very good combination of range and power available with that one attack. Although I've also certainly seen some folks rally behind the two-handed R2's running slash that works very well to close the distance between the player and approaching enemies. Fifth, boy, there sure are a lot of pros for Dark Souls' worst weapon. The weapon does actually deal significant damage to early enemies and bosses, like the Tauros Demon and the Bell Gargoyles. Even if, in my last video on the subject, my salt for the pitiful endgame damage and single-minded attempt to build a narrative against the sword had me saying the opposite. The damage is, as the name suggests, pretty ass, but these guys aren't exactly that tough, even if I'm barely seeing yellow on that health bar. Side note, the absolute failure of that one line has completely changed my scripting process now, so that I can catch those before I shove my whole foot in my mouth. Finally, the weapon's initials are ass, which is fun to say because I am a child. As for the cons, well, those are a little steeper. First, the damage scaling from soul levels isn't exactly there. This is caused by the scaling from each stat only maxing out at about C rank. There's a whole can of worms to unpack with what those letter ranks actually mean, but for our purposes now, C rank is about as middle of the road as it gets, generally offering so little in the way of actual stat increases that health and stamina are the more worthwhile stat to dump into. Then there is also the issue of the fact that this scaling is spread out across 3 different stats: strength, dex, and faith, which really forces a widespread build in order to maximize damage, usually at the cost of the aforementioned health and stamina that would be a better use of soul levels. Second, as a Twinkling Titanite weapon, the scaling from leveling the ass is uniquely abysmal. While at +5 it should be contending with a +15 version of similar longswords, it often finds itself better compared to a +10. Meanwhile, many other Twinkling Titanite weapons do manage to compare with +15 standard weapons, with some outshining the standard variety entirely. But more on that in a second. Third, the nature of the Twinkling Titanite also leads to a lack of a progression loop through a casual run. There are reasons for the stopgaps in power gains in Dark Souls. Getting the Large Ember requires reaching and defeating Capra Demon. Large Titanite shards are rare up until Sen's Fortress. The Very Large Ember is ideally in an endgame location. These all lead to a consistent feeling of slowly growing in power as the player progresses from boss to boss, keeping the player's stats climbing at the same rate as each encounter offers more challenges. Fourth, the ass cannot be enhanced with spells or resins. This is a con on pretty much every Twinkling Titanite weapon, to be honest, but the low damage on this weapon in particular really makes the inability for temporary improvement a real downer. Especially considering that something as simple as Magic Weapon can take the broken Straight Sword or Straight Sword hilt all the way from throwaway pieces of trash to actively meeting the DPS requirements for 4 kings. And there is a faith version of this spell that could otherwise synergize with the Astora Straight Sword. Fifth, there are many better options throughout the game that check every single box in the pro category. with either fewer cons or removing them altogether. And that actually leads us into our next major point, the replacements. Depending on what your main attraction to the ass is, there is a suitable substitute for every single aspect of the weapon. Do you like that the ass can permanently kill skeletons? Then head on into the catacombs and kill Patches. He's really not that useful as a shopkeeper in this game, and you get to pretend you're trying to help Rhea early. Also, he tries to kill you here anyway, so he kinda deserves it. This will net you the Crescent Axe, a faith-based axe with the divine property that can permanently kill skeletons, and has some of the best range on the axe class of weapons. Alternatively, you can head down to Darkroot Garden and kill the Moonlight Butterfly. Super easy. I said super easy. And then you can start upgrading through the divine path. This can be for any weapon, but if you're hell-bent on getting that longsword moveset, then why not apply it to a longsword? That's not even to mention the Baldur side sword, but the drop rate for that makes it a bit less practical. Or is your goal really to pick up a Twinkling Titanite weapon so that you can have endgame damage from go? Well, again, the Crescent Axe, but why not go for the gold standard among Twinkling Titanite weapons? The Black Knight Arsenal. With a little RNG and some parries, we can pretty quickly and easily find a Black Knight with a halberd, a greatsword, and even 3 with the regular old Black Knight sword, so that we can try to get the drop. All without fighting a single boss, given that you started with the Master Key. Otherwise, you only get 1 chance for the Black Knight sword in Undead Burg. But these do come with their own costs, because Dark Souls doesn't want to simply hand out its best weapons without any obstacle to overcome. Which, on second thought, must be why the ass is sitting out in the open like that. First, among the cons for these alternate weapons, is that unlocking the Divine upgrade does involve killing a boss, which can be pretty hard right at the start of the game. It also requires a separate rare material in order to upgrade, the green Titanite shards. Although those can ideally be a pro as well, but we'll get to that. Second, the Crescent Axe also requires killing a difficult enemy, in this case, Patches. When he turtles behind his shield, he can be a bit of a pain for new players trying to get their revenge after he sends them plummeting off the bridge. Third, the Crescent Axe and the Black Knight Arsenal all have higher minimum requirements than the ass. It's only slightly higher for the Crescent Axe, which is often better in 2 hands anyway, but for any of the Black Knight weapons, those pretty much all require about a mid-game level character. Not exactly something you can start using immediately in most cases. However, on the pros side, these alternative weapons kind of take the lead. First, the Divine Longsword can hit +5 immediately by farming a handful of slugs in Blighttown. They're easy and numerous around the Great Hollow, and give 5 green Titanite per drop. Also, getting the first green Titanite to start the path is as easy as making a single jump in New Londo Ruins. Second, after beating Pinwheel, players can find the large Divine Ember in the Tomb of the Giants and farm up white Titanite chunks off the Bone Towers. Which means it only takes 1 boss for a Divine Longsword to reach +9, and can eventually reach +10, and as we'll see in a second, that winds up putting it leagues above the ass as a divine weapon. Third, the Divine Longsword is still a longsword, so it gets the exact same moveset as the ass. Fourth, the Crescent Axe also upgrades with Twinkling Titanite, which means it can hit +5 as quickly as the Astora Straight Sword can. Fifth, the Crescent Axe doesn't require the Master Key, or killing any bosses in order to reach it from the start. Sixth, both are better at killing Nidoskeletons, which is the most important time where blessed weapons matter. And finally, the Crescent Axe has better damage overall against the ass, both per hit, but also in DPS, even though they can both be brought to max level at the same time and both lean heavily on faith. To prove that last point, let's go over a few stats by taking the weapon against 2 different mid-game bosses with varying soul and weapon upgrade levels, to see what I mean when I say that the ass's scaling is terrible and that these other weapons beat it outright. So to start against Quelaag, with only base stats to wield the Astora Straight Sword and the weapon upgraded to +3, we can see that it actually takes an early lead against some of the competition, with an R1 dealing about 35 damage and an R2 dealing 67. It beats out the Divine Longsword's 27 and 49 with the R1 and R2 respectively. Bringing up the rear though is the regular +5 Longsword, only dealing 22 and 43 with the R1 and R2. However, even at that point, we can see a drastic difference in damage with the Crescent Axe at +0. While it is admittedly being two-handed in order to meet the stat requirements, it is still managing to clear the ass +3 with double the damage per swing, dealing 78 damage with the R1 and 135 with an R2. So we're 3 upgrades below, but still dealing more than twice as much damage per swing. And the axe moveset, when it connects, isn't exactly slow. So even adjusting for DPS with both hitting as fast as they can, the Crescent Axe comes out on top without even being upgraded. Next up, let's upgrade some of the other weapons. For one, we've now taken the Astora Straight Sword all the way to +5 thanks to the Crystal Lizards in the Great Hollow, and you can see that our damage has increased, but not even by enough to match the two-handed Crescent Axe. We're now dealing 47 per R1 and 94 per R2. Which actually gets edged out slightly by the Divine Longsword, now at +5, doing 48 per R1 and 96 per R2. It's a small amount, completely negligible in practical application, but remember that this is a fully upgraded ass versus a half-upgraded Divine Longsword. Between the amount of farming and items required to get this, the only difference so far is really the Moonlight Butterfly and some RNG on the slugs. Otherwise, we're still dealing slightly more damage with a weapon that still has 5 extra levels to go. Now, for the regular longsword, we're still lagging behind, even as we've upgraded the weapon to +9, only dealing 37 with an R1 and 79 with an R2, coming well under both the Astora Straight Sword and the Divine Longsword. However, a quick application of some gold pine resin, and suddenly, this is competing with the Crescent Axe, dealing 74 damage per R1 and 116 per R2. Technically lower damage per hit than the Crescent Axe, but the speed difference between the two would likely give the edge to the resined longsword, at least against the base level Crescent Axe. Let's take another step further and give our character mid-soul level stats, basically using about 60,000 souls, which is around where you'd be after making it all the way through Blighttown on the standard path of progression, when accounting for the souls earned from each boss. This is a bit of a lowball estimate, of course, since it doesn't take into account the souls earned while clearing each location leading up to the boss, but this is also evened out a bit with the costs of upgrading weapons up until this point anyway. Either way, we're at around level 30, and now we can see how the scaling for these weapons works. A bit to my surprise, to be honest, the scaling on the ass is actually slightly better than the scaling on the Divine Longsword, since their respective damage is now swapped, with the Astora Straight Sword coming out on top with a 57 on the R1s and a 117 on the R2s, while the Divine +5 only manages 54 on R1s and 110 on R2s. But that difference is about as negligible as the Divine +5's lead was before, but still remember that this is the ass's endgame versus the Divine's midgame. With some extra strength and dex to bolster the build, the regular longsword also strikes a bit closer with 51 on R1s and 110 on R2s, but that is again without the resins or spells to upgrade the damage further. And now that we're a slightly higher level and can one-hand the Crescent Axe, we can finally give it a more realistic showing, as it deals 53 with an R1 and 100 with an R2. Again, coming within a negligible range of all the others, even though it hasn't been upgraded at all. But hey, before taking out Quelaag, it can be difficult to actually measure these weapons perfectly against each other, especially with all of this hand-waving about how the Crescent Axe isn't leveled yet. So let's move on to ONS in order to gather a bit more endgame build data on some of these weapons. Additionally, we can now start getting a feel for how all of these compare to the Black Knight arsenal, specifically in this case, the Black Knight sword. Starting again with the mid-soul level stats and the +5 ass, we deal 53 to Ornstein with an R1 and 106 with an R2. The Divine +5 is once again very comparable, dealing 52 on R1 and 105 on R2. Literally a 1-point difference, although the regular longsword, which is now at +11, is strangely breaking the curve between light and heavy attacks, dealing 53 on R1 to match the ass, but climbing up to 114 for the R2. Not sure if that's an effect of the split damage and Ornstein's magic defense or whatever, but yeah, another thing to hold on to, I guess. At this point, we've also fully leveled up the Crescent Axe and can really compare it to the ass for real. And considering that the one-handed R1 from the Crescent Axe +5 does 145 damage per hit, it really doesn't compare. And then the R2 swings down big for 227 damage. The Crescent Axe is the undisputed champion of divine weapons. But if we're going to be testing the heights of Twinkling Titanite weapons, then we've also got the Black Knight Sword, which deals a whopping 194 with an R1. It's considerably slower, being a greatsword and all, but it can also stagger with only a couple hits, so it still has some pretty good DPS potential. Although, even though the R2 deals an incredible 331, the timing is terrible on Black Knight heavy attacks, so it would be disingenuous to compare it to any of these weapons. Alright, and to finish off our data collection, we're finishing upgrading the longsword to plus 15, and we're pumping all of our stats to the soft cap. That's strength, dex, and faith hitting around 60 all at once. The soft cap is really around 40 or 50, but I was trying to be thorough. This way we can see exactly how well the scaling goes. So, with our stats buffed to the extreme, the ass tops out at 95 on R1 and 201 on R2. And once again, we see little difference between the Divine Longsword plus 5 versus the Astora Straight Sword plus 5, with the Divine dealing 104 with an R1 and 188 with an R2. Again, really not sure why some lights and some heavies are better or worse, but yeah, these two are pretty comparable. What isn't comparable is the Longsword plus 15. Something that can easily be obtained at this point by heading into New Londo early, by killing Ingvard and getting the Titanite slab from killing Stray Demon back in Undead Asylum. With this weapon, we deal 200 damage per R1 and 339 per R2, nearly doubling both the light and heavy of both the ass and Divine, while also still having the opportunity to add lightning or fire with resins. Or I could run down and kill Gwendolyn for Sunlight Blade. Either way, Longsword plus 15 is already way stronger and could continue to grow, which is the theme here. While the ass stops short very quickly, every other weapon always has new ceilings to reach for. Then there are the powerhouses that are the Black Knight Sword and the Crescent Axe, which deal 296 and 235 with their R1s respectively. Still stacking higher per hit than the Longsword plus 5, but as far as raw DPS goes, especially when compared to the potential of resins, they're about on par with the Longsword. And the edge might actually go to the faster of the three because, yeah, the Longsword's goated. Although, before we leave the data section here completely, we should probably look at the damage of the ass versus the Divine plus 10. Although since we can't get the Divine 2 plus 10 until after beating ONS, we'll compare the two against regular Hollows and Firelink. Honestly, I could have really measured the damage here the whole time, but fitting in that boss fight footage there before makes the whole experience a little more exciting. Like, look how boring it is to see a 289 pop up as the ass plus 5 kills a Hollow in one R1. Then an R2 kills another with 423 damage. But it still shows the major discrepancy as the Divine plus 10 deals 364 with an R1 and 525 with an R2. Massively overshooting the damage available on the ass when both are at their peak. This is where the Astora Straight Sword finds itself. It's noob bait, a weapon that makes a big splash early on, but then should be replaced sometime around Blighttown, right when it hits its max level. When compared to similarly upgraded weapons like the Crescent Axe and Black Knight Sword, it doesn't measure up. No matter how much it can stomp the Gargoyles or Taurus Demon, the failure to live up to the promise of being able to see the player through to the end gives me no choice but to consider the ass a truly terrible weapon. But hey, what does this have to do with Dark Souls 3? That's the actual point of this video, right? With how somehow DS3 made its ass worse than this one. Well, that comes in how the weapon has changed. Not all for the worse, mind. For one, this new ass can still be found relatively early, in a chest on a balcony toward the end of the High Wall of Lothric. As in, the first level of the game. It's also even easier to get online since the Herald already meets the stat requirements from go. However, the weapon has lost its innate divine blessing and no longer kills skeletons immediately. There are some changes with how reviving skeletons work in DS3, where they only come back once, and most of them are found in Karthus, but still, that was the main benefit of the ass before, so what could it possibly do to shine against other straight swords? Especially now that it takes the standard upgrade path, instead of hitting max right off the bat with Twinkling Titanite. So, while DS1's scaling system left the Astora Straight Sword behind, DS3 unfortunately nerfed everything that made the weapon unique. But that's not even the worst of it, to be honest. Although, I suppose the real issue I have with the DS3 ass that makes the weapon even worse than its predecessor is fairly personal. having more to do with playstyle and, of course, my own intentions with making this video moving forward. But that's getting a little ahead of ourselves. To really understand what ruins the ass in DS3, we're going to need to go on a little journey through Lothric to hunt the Lords of Cinder, that we might make a new mark on the Age of Fire. Oh, and before we get into the run, if you've enjoyed this portion of the video, then maybe go check out some of the other video essays like this section that I've written. Those in my Retro Respect series are kind of my favorite videos to work on, but with the way YouTube works, the almighty algorithm every YouTuber feels forced to talk about, challenge runs are often better for the health of the channel. But yeah, if I can get more eyes on that other stuff and YouTube actually picks up on it to grow the channel, then I'd love the excuse to dive into that content more frequently. Oh yeah, and the other YouTuber stuff, like, comment, subscribe, whatever. Anyway, let's get to the run. Alright, it's been a hot minute since I've come to visit the lands of Lothric. What stands between us and getting our weapon? Right. Him. Well, this puts us in a bit of a pickle. Because I don't really want to, put on whatever and kill Gundyr, so instead we need a thematically appropriate way to fight him. How about firebombs? I do dung pies, but they aren't available yet. But yeah, firebombs. That seems like a cool idea. Alright, starting over. So we're starting off as the Herald, which will let us use the Astora Straight Sword once we do find it. But in order to get past Gundyr, we'll have to take black firebombs as our starting gift. However, in order to round up the damage, we also need to drop off the cliff before the boss and pick up an extra 5 regular firebombs. Even then, we run into a few issues with this tactic. For one, Herald doesn't have the most strength, which means that we don't have the max damage possible here. We could get more from starting as the warrior, but the extra strength isn't necessary and would leave us unable to wield the axe when we finally get it. Second, we need every single firebomb, and they don't replenish once you're out of combat. So if we miss or die after throwing any firebombs at all, then we need to fully reset and recreate our character in order to get the materials we need. Point C, Gundyr takes reduced damage during his phase transition, which means that even though this is usually a really nice moment to get a few licks in, his extra defenses means that we are only wasting firebombs by throwing them now. And part IV, the order in which firebombs we use matters. And it's actually counterintuitive what the order needs to be. It's actually better to use black firebombs in the first phase and save the standard firebombs for phase 2. I can't tell you how many runs I wasted thinking that I needed to save the black firebombs for phase 2 for a boost in damage that wasn't actually there against the Pus of Man. So, for the run that finally gets the win, we make sure to parry before getting our attacks off in the first phase, although I don't know if this is entirely necessary since it doesn't seem to make the firebomb deal any additional damage compared to when I threw them without parrying. Hey, Editor Brock here, and yes, the parries were absolutely necessary. It gives me 50 extra damage per throw, it's actually 46 to be exact. And considering that we're less than 100 damage short of the kill without the parries in phase 1, this is completely needed, and the real reason why the order mattered as much as it did. Still, we eventually get our timing down, don't waste any shots, and Gundyr goes down. First obstacle done. And now we get to run around Firelink for a sec to do the tree jump and grab the Estus shard, as well as opening the secret chest for the silver serpent ring. And we get some extra levels in vigor for some extra HP. Okay, time to get our weapon. So, it takes a hot minute to actually get where we're going, but some running, a quick quit out that quickly teaches me that I need to learn new quit out muscle memory, and a short trip through basically the end of this area, and we've finally got our weapon. Look, it even kills enemies. Really well, in fact. And they kill me really well, too. Anyway, while we're down here, we also get an extra Estus shard and the key to Greyrat's cell. But that's neither here nor there. What is here is our first boss, Fort of the Boreal Valley. So isn't this weapon supposed to be much worse than it was in DS1? Then why is it absolutely chunking a hole out of Vort's ass? Well, we'll get there, but for now, it's a sword and this is Vort. What do you expect? Easy first try kill. Moving on. In a lot of my previous playthroughs, most done before ever doing challenge runs, like what we're doing right now, a challenge with a weird sword that is different. Anyway, every time I come to the undead settlement, I get lost, and this is no different. Lots of running around, talking to NPCs like you'll let my lostness here explain why I'll be glossing over certain areas, even though I'll have very thoroughly explored them. But we simply do not have time to go over every little thing. Like joining the Mound Makers, which I didn't even get footage of, making peace with the giant archer, even though I'd skipped the section he's guarding, and eventually killing the demon alongside Sigbert, which drops a fire gem. You know, that gives me an idea. Hold, please. Alright, first things first, we're getting some mise en place, as they say, starting with the obvious. A nice fresh onion and some spices. Now, folks, always make sure to taste test your spices while cooking. For one, it'll help you recognize each spice and understand how it's adding to the flavor of the overall dish, while also helping you recognize what is in your favorite food so you can recreate it at home. But it's also important to know how fresh your spices are, because if they lose some of their potency, you might need more than you expect in order to properly season a dish. Now, the trick is to mix your spices with a pinch of salt so that you can really get a taste of what you're working with. So I've got a bit of basil here, usually my favorite, but my current bottle is a little lacking. Gonna need some extra today. Then I've got some smoked paprika, gives a nice floral, smoky fragrance, but not really much in the way of heat. For that, I've got this Japanese spice mix my girlfriend got me a while back. A quick lick of that and...
Everything okay in there?
Mistakes were made. Okay, and we're back. That was a bad idea. But while I was committing war crimes on my toilet, I thought, hey, art imitates life, imitates art and whatnot. So let's be inspired by this particularly pepper-powered posterior puckering and transfer that heat from my ass to the ass by imbuing the weapon with fire back at Andre. Oh, and while I was out, I also picked up the Mira outfit, and we'll be wearing that until we can get something more thematically appropriate. Why? Because it looked cool. Alright, now that we've been lost here for like 2 hours, time for the actual boss fight. Honestly, something I miss about DS3. Even if I still run past a lot of enemies, I still find myself compelled to explore every location pretty thoroughly. But eventually, it is boss time, and for this area, that means Curse-Rotted Greatwood. Which should imply that this is an all-bosses run, because, you know, we aren't really doing this for the Transposing Guild. Actually, we will use that exactly twice, but it's not extremely relevant. As for the fight, it's a standard order affair. Attack the balls, avoid the ads, and don't get crushed right at the end. You know, I'd say something about this being cheap or a poor telegraph or whatever, but that'd be cope. Which might be fitting for the theme of this entire video, but yeah, that was absolutely greed. I was out of heals, saw that little notch left in the health bar, and tried to end the fight quickly, completely ignoring the gimmick in the process. On a second attempt, I recollect myself, actually adhere to the gimmick at play, and clutch out a victory. Even though, once again, I'm pretty down on heals and nearly die a second time. Of course, once the Greatwood is taken care of, it's time to challenge the Outrider Knight that leads to the next area. Now, could I run past him and not bother fighting? Sure, but am I gonna? Apparently not. But with some perseverance and better dodging, since my current lack of shield means I really can't guard at all, I finally get it. Only to find the weapon I used for my entire first playthrough of this game. Oh, how I wish I could use this again. Wouldn't exactly be a challenge run, but I did have a fun build I was messing around with the last time I played this game casually that utilizes the Astora Straight Sword. Could make for a fun video. I mean, this run is hardly a challenge in itself, more of a build showcase. In that case, let's go work on finishing up the build, because we've got another tool to add to our belt after the next boss. So, this one is a pretty quick stop in the road of sacrifices. We go meet Henri and admire her armor. A sharp look, if I do say so myself. And we're swiftly on to the Crystal Sage. Once again, we die on our first attempt because of the ass and its terrible damage output. Definitely not me. Definitely not. Clearly it's the sword. and not a massive skill issue. Anyway, on a second attempt, I do a little better to actually avoid some hits, and once we hit the second phase, I start clearing clones in order to reduce the risk of taking those pesky backshots while I'm focused on the main boss. And with no heals left, I bum rush the real Crystal Sage to land the last few hits I need. Sometimes, greed can win the day. Sometimes. So we're now headed to the Cathedral of the Deep, and before we even get into the cathedral proper, we've got two notes to focus on. For one, the weapon skill for the ass is really great against most enemies with shields, which includes quite a few NPCs, like the ones leading up to the church. Holding L2 puts the player into this stance, holding the sword something resembling the ox stance. Then the R1 uses the stance to thrust forward, which usually breaks the guard of any opponent and opens them up to be riposted. Which is nice, while we don't have a shield that can parry and give us that option in combat. Oh, and we also pick up the crest shield, the next part of the ass build that now gives us access to a parry, and stops us from using the stance unless we two-hand the weapon. As for the rest of the trip up the cathedral, we run into a little trouble against the cathedral grave wardens. But a few charged R2 pokes as they approach gives us a decent way to get through their double saber dance and get past them. Also, the fire imbuing makes the maggot-infested hollows and the dogs fairly simple, as the first attack causes them to flail around long enough to be finished off with a quick combo. We also find the Astora's Great Sword here, and I was rather tempted to add it to my build here, but this is a notoriously impressive weapon, and I'm trying to prove how terrible the smaller ass is. So, while I will start dumping some spare Titanite into the big one, because at least the name matches, it'll be shelved for the remainder of the run. Although, in the case of the terrible flaming turd I'm forcing myself to use, it kills the deep accursed in the trap room on the first try. Unexpected, not gonna lie. I was definitely expecting to have to come back and pick up my souls on a return trip. Oh, and speaking of flaming turds, we have the Deacons of the Deep. Yeah, this is a very normal fight. It's a sword against the Deacons, and I use hit and run tactics to not get overwhelmed. This is also a great time to mention that the fire imbuing that I've done on the ass removes all scaling from the weapon, which does limit my overall damage potential, but also leaves me to dump all of my levels into HP and stamina. Meaning, by this point, I've pretty much hit the Vigor soft cap, or at least am running close to it. And as such, our healthy boy more than matches up to the crowd and quickly takes down the Deacons. Like the Cathedral, Fair and Keep doesn't have too much to go over. We grab my favorite weapon to take through this game, the Greatsword. You know, the Berserk one with the much superior DS2 design. We dig through some slugs to find another undead bone shard, and then we light the fires in order to open the door to the Firelink altar, which is here in this swamp for some reason, and get to the fight. But not before I kill a Dark Wraith and it drops the Dark Sword, another of my favorite weapons to use in this game. Yeah, naturally it drops now, when I can't use it, after I've spent hours trying to farm the damn thing while playing casually. I need to find something to let out all this pent-up irritation on. Yeah, you'll do. So yeah, our damage here is fine, and again, we're healthy boys, which means we have a ton of room to make a handful of mistakes. Pretty good, considering that I need to survive with two of these dudes out at the same time. That is, until Red Eyes shows up to offer some backup. And with a little split aggro in my favor, and the hot flaming ass chunking some health away, we quickly make it to phase 2, which will absolutely kill me. It will kill me. This thing, with its wonky secondary attacks and high-speed aggression, will absolutely die. Okay, killed the Abyss Watchers on the first try. How? I'm crazy rusty at this game. This should not have happened. Especially not with a weapon this terrible. It must be a fluke. Surely my next death will come soon. There we go, much better. Back to meeting expectations. As mentioned before, the Catacombs of Karthus really showcases the biggest nerf that the ass got in DS3. It's the skeletons here, which now resurrect once before they'll die permanently, instead of needing to find a necromancer or have a divine weapon in order to kill them until resting at a bonfire. Now, to note, this loss of divinity is not from me using the fire imbuing, although I could have imbued the ass with a blessed gem in order to one-shot the skeletons, but the weapon has lost its innate ability to do the same. So, it has lost kind of the only thing that made it remotely useful back in its previous incarnation. Now, while we're here, breaking some skeleballs and whatnot, we aren't actually going straight to the boss fight. Instead, we'll be dropping the bridge in order to get down into... Yep, we're headed down into the smoldering lake. And while this does equate to about 3 hours of my play session, we'll quickly go over the major points. Like letting this mimic kill the demon right at the start. Or letting the demon kill the mimic. I swear I have seen this thing kill the demon with no problem in the past, so this is new. Maybe that's what happened back with the Abyss Watchers. We've entered a reverso world where damage sources are reversed, which is why the mimic died and the hot flaming ass is, working in my hands specifically. Alright, let's see the other hits. Let Solaire get killed by the Avalon Ballista, kill Horus in the pit he fell in, and grab a handful of extra Estus materials. We done? Good. Let's head into the boss fight. It's old Demon King time. A big fire demon. How's this guy's fire defense? Ooh, look at that. A 78% fire absorption. Great. So, this takes some time, and of course the old Demon King kills me. Or maybe not with that hit. Or that one. Or... Wait, what? Did I kill him? On my first try? No shit. Well, this guy isn't exactly the hardest. His big claim to fame is that big health pool, which only really means we've got a long fight on our hands. And as is always the case when dealing with such length, the key is to relax, breathe in the brief moments of reprieve it allows, and enjoy the ride. And we're back to Carthus for real, where we quickly tell Henri about Horus, and... slobber over that armor again. Sorry, we're moving on. Wolnir time, and he's dead. But you know what? That's normal. It's Wolnir. Once you know how to beat him, it's only a matter of going through the motions. You know, like life. Before we head to our next destination, we'll be sending Greyrat off to collect some stuff. Not sure if it'll be necessary, but I like finishing quest lines. But in order to keep him alive, we'll go grab the Katarina armor from Patches and free our friendly Onion Knight. Then we can head on into Irithyll properly. Still not sure exactly what's going on here. Should definitely be having more trouble against stuff like this. I mean, this weapon is worse than the original ass, right? Right? Yeah, definitely. In fact, I think I know what's happening. This isn't DS3, reputing my definitely valid assumptions about the weapon. It's a testament to my unadulterated, raw, Giga-Chad energy. It's me. I'm too powerful. Too epic. Too fucking Jozu. I even managed to keep Greyrat alive. See, his dead body isn't there, and Onion Knight is here waiting to save him. We also pick up the bonfire leading into the profane capital for later. But for now, we've got a boss fight to absolutely stomp. So, who's the unfortunate soul that stands in my way? Oh boy. Alright, guess we'll have to lock in on this one. Summon my inner jawline and get a handful of fantastic parries to drop Sullivan to one knee. And even though I usually suck at parries in DS3, something clicks with my now Chadley fingers. And I don't even miss a single one throughout the entire fight. And even though I normally suck at fighting the evil Pope, even with my favorite weapons, when I've taken way more care into crafting my build, and even sometimes after gaining all of the souls from Profaned Capital, and yet he goes down on the first try, with the hot, flaming ass in my hands. My goodness. I'm even more of a Chad than I ever could have thought. Let's keep up this momentum by wiping our sack over Aldrich's face. Yeah, another first try and he didn't even attempt to stop me. And my Chad skills and my Chad No, it can't. It isn't the ass, it's me! Me, damn it! I did this! And that. Yeah. Me too. Then, first trying the boss is only because my damage is absolutely goated. And this ass is cracked. No shitting. But you know what? That proves my point even harder. Between removing the automatic blessing to kill the skeletons in one go, and swapping the twinkling upgrade for a standard path, and then this, giving the weapon scaling that actually makes it viable from the beginning of the game through to the end, yeah, DS3 ruined the ass by ruining this run that was supposed to be a challenge and is now a step above standard. Honestly, how am I supposed to make a video out of this? Who's gonna be satisfied, can I beat Dark Souls, but my weapon is goated? Stupid Miyazaki. Stupid Dark Souls. Stupid ass! Oh, and while I've been screaming, I freed the Onion Knight from his jail cell so he'd give us a Titanite slap. Awesome. Now if I can find the remaining chunks, I can get the weapon to hit plus 15. Although, if Onion Knight is here, then where's Grey Rat? What? How? I saved him! And that is why I completely stopped doing character quest lines. Well, all except for... Hey, we finally got the Elite Knight armor, but we keep the Thrall hood from my boy, Grey Rat. I'll remember you. Okay, now we can head into and immediately fighting Yorm. Ooh, big boy. You know what that means. We need a big sword. Oh, hey, Onion Knight, what are you doing here, bud? Yeah, for this one, we're actually acting as a tank rather than DPS. Because even with the Astora's Greatsword to work with, Yorm is absolutely a gimmick boss, and we can't use the gimmick weapon with this run. But Onion Knight can. So, you know, even if most of that health is going down because of that NPC, it doesn't exactly mean we're breaking the rules. You know, because I didn't summon him, and I didn't use the Storm Ruler. We're calling this technically correct. The best kind of correct. Also, this way I get to use the Greatsword in one fight where the massive increase in dabblage really doesn't mean anything. Sick. Oh, right. Okay, time to lose all of the souls that we got from Yorm. Guess that works out since we did use a technicality to get through. Only fair that we die to the dancer and don't get any rewards from that kill. There we go, that ought to do it. No? Okay, phase 2, that'll definitely kill me. Or it won't. Alright. Oh, alright, first try kill. Great! More evidence that this stupid weapon is stupid overpowered by killing stupid dancer immediately after fighting stupid Yorm. Wonderful. Keep digging that dagger into my side. Stupid run. Lost Grey Rat. Keep killing bosses on the first try. Prove that the ass is the best straight sword in the game. I'll be laughed out of house and home, which is the same building, but it stings twice as hard, okay? Alright, at least that takes the sting off a little. See, this run is still at least somewhat hard, right? I mean, it is Dark Souls 3 after all. First off, we take a quick trip into the Consumed King's Garden for some Estus materials, as well as a nice look at my next challenge. Can't confirm yet if that's going to be a challenge, but I do know that the start will be. As for this challenge run, we don't stay here long, and instead head up to the Lothric Castle proper, which goes pretty well. I mean, a few deaths, or kill another Outrider Knight, kill the dragons eventually, and become a Sunbro, because I needed a third thing. Okay, boss time. So, Dragon Slayer armor. I actually made quick mention of him in my last video, saying that I enjoyed fighting every variation of Ornstein in each game. And while it isn't exactly Ornstein himself in here, but instead of the soul of a bunch of rotting butterflies. Citation needed for the accuracy and context of that statement, but yeah, this is the one I meant for this game back then. And yes, the other version is also included. As for this fight, my own massive health bar definitely helps me get through the armor's heavy defenses, and the supplemental attacks that the aforementioned butterflies try to throw at us. which means we're able to snake out another first try kill. Not much to say from the archives. Crystal Sage is a pill, but we kill it, and the Outrider Knight, and the NPC trio, and we head up to the boss fight. Alright, Twin Princes, our first death to a boss in a while. That being said, it only takes a second try to get it. The key here is to basically ignore Lorien once you hit the second phase. His health bar really doesn't matter at that point. Instead, focus entirely on giving those backshots to Lothric's tight little body up there, and blow your whole load on him and not his hulking bear of a brother. But once we've slapped our hot flaming ass all over this throne room, we can finally place the ashes on the Firelink thrones and prepare to take on the final boss. But we aren't exactly done yet, because we haven't checked every boss off the list, and we're starting first by heading back to... We've already been in here, so naturally we're immediately running to kill Osiris. And we're right back to the first try fights again. Somehow, against Osiris, of all bosses. Like, this dude is a major pain in the straight sword, with wonky hitboxes and attacks that can immediately close any distance and completely deny the entire arena. And yet, we're through without much effort. I would certainly note, however, that while some of my dodging is on point, there's definitely an element of luck and my stacked health bar really carrying the weight here. But we still get the kill on our first try, and can move on to what Osiris was guarding. Specifically, we'll be picking up the Path of the Dragon emote, and we'll be heading further into the... This location and the area behind the boss don't really have much to speak on. I mean, we've got our armor, we've got our shield, and we've got our weapon. Aside from picking up extra Titanite chunks, there's really nothing in any of the coming locations that will update the build. So, straight on to Champion Gundyr. The tutorial boss is much stronger, more accomplished older brother. Or previous life before being resurrected by the pus of man. But I don't understand the lore of this place at all. It confuses me, with its time travel implications and whatnot. As for the boss himself, I cannot express how powerful this weapon is, and how unexpectedly powerful this build is. I picked Fire Infusion because I expected it to be underpowered because of the lack of scaling, so I could lie about it being even worse than the last game. So that I could technically be correct in calling it worse again. You know, that best kind of correct. Because that option to be so non-optimal is available, but yeah, Champion Gundyr goes down in the first attempt. We also head into the Darkened Firelink and pick up the Coiled Sword Fragment. Nothing else here is really of note. On to the next location. Show of hands, how many of you actually found this without a guide? And if you actually raised your hand, this is why you need to go watch the Lunar Retrospective. Because I still can't see you. Anyway, first boss is no problem. Ancient Wyvern. Fuck. I don't want to hear shit about this. Alright, now we get into the real dungeon. The NPCs are something. They definitely caused me more trouble here than they have before. The weapon skill still goes hard against NPC shields, but we don't really have enough FP to fully rely on it. And in that case, the Charge R2 is great at catching pretty much any enemy as they approach. Then there's Havel. Havel fucks me up. Until I finally get it. I also get Hawkwood to join me to gather the Twinkling Dragon Stones, although he doesn't quite make it all the way to the top this time. I'm definitely leaning on letting him do a lot of the fighting a bit too much. We do head back to the Abyss Watcher's arena and kill him for the other stone though. That being said, this fucker heals way more than most NPCs. Really drags the fight out. But we still get him in one and can head back to fight the Nameless King. The Storm King phase is one of the first times that the change over to a regular straight sword from my ordinary go-to for casual DS3 runs, which, let's be honest, this is basically a casual, stupid ass being so fucking good in this game, causes a problem. Namely, it's the greatsword I enjoy so much, which has a much longer range than the ass. The combination of length difference and the clouds making up the majority of the arena really messes with my depth perception, so a lot of these attacks wind up missing. Even through all of the attempts it takes, I never really feel like I have a full handle on it. Against Nameless King himself, though, landing hits is nowhere near as much of an issue. The bigger issue is not taking hits, but dozens of Elden Ring runs have already prepared me for the Delay King. I don't get it in one this time, but still. It doesn't take me nearly as long as I might have assumed otherwise. It's almost easy enough to give me a severely false confidence as we move into the DLC. Speaking of... Snow, snow, and more snow, and it's Champion Gravetender time. So we've got another NPC with a shield, which means we can stance our way through most of his section of the fight. Like, I can't straight up press L2 to win, but like... Then, when Notsif shows up, we continue to focus the NPC until we can fight the wolf one-on-one. At this point, it's a very different fight, but the hot flaming ass sees us through. Truly an incredible weapon. Snow, snow, and even more snow again. I really don't know how to express how boring this DLC is. At least the last boss is pretty fun. Speaking of which, this right here is definitely the best part of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, and honestly, a highlight for the series, even if I usually don't like the multiple health bar bosses. It combines all of the best parts of Bloodborne's Maria and DS1's Priscilla in some very interesting ways. Even the second phase with 2 enemies out at the same time is quite the success, as the 2 have varying levels of aggression that takes advantage of there being 2 enemies without it becoming a mishmash of unrelated attacks flinging out at random. Although, to complete the absolute travesty that is this run, my hot flaming ass continues to absolutely drop-kick these bosses. It isn't a first try kill, those are pretty much completely out of the window at this point, but it certainly doesn't take as long as I otherwise would have assumed for a boss this difficult. Finally, we're in the good DLC. Too bad we're running full speed through it. Yeah, nothing to improve the build here, so we rush forward. We do kill one of the angels, which is cool, but let's otherwise get to the boss quickly. Time for Demon in Pain and Demon from Below. So, funny thing about my hot flaming ass, turns out Demon in Pain and Demon from Below both have extremely high fire damage resistance, with about a 78% damage absorption for fire damage, which means that this first phase of the fight is going to take forever, and I need to have a perfect understanding of both bosses' movesets in order to make it through to the end. Yeah, I somehow always forget that this fight even exists, so their moveset is completely out of my mind. Like, I'm basically relearning this all over again, since I somehow have 0 muscle memory for this fight. Still, after a few deaths to the learning curve comes the second phase. Alright, reset the curve, let's get to it. Yeah, this is anything but easy, and each phase is a war of attrition thanks to the fact that the 78% fire damage absorption cranks up to 90%. Real quick aside about damage absorption. I know that sounds like fire heals the boss, but that is not really the case. Damage absorption is often how From Software defines defense, by noting the amount of damage from an attack that will be negated by a blow. Sometimes it gets called damage negation, by the way, but it's the same basic idea from game to game. A good example of how this is unique to From Software comes from comparing with Kingdom Hearts, which takes a more direct approach to damage and defense. Without getting too into the nitty-gritty, or the variation across the series, Kingdom Hearts 2 makes a simple equation of one character's attack, either Sora's, a Heartless, or a boss, and subtracts it by the opposing target's defense, and the resulting number is the amount of damage done to the target's HP. There are a lot of multipliers to work with across both attack and defense, depending on which attack in a combo is hitting the target, as well as a bunch of other factors when applying skills and elemental damage types. But very basically, the damage dealt is attack minus defense, with a lower and upper limit for the minimum and maximum amount of damage that any given attack is allowed to deal. This is in contrast to how FromSoft will simply take a percentage of the total damage that was supposed to be dealt and remove that from the actual damage output. So yeah, fun ways that different devs deal with attack and defense stats. And amongst all of that rambling, we finally get the win. Alright, we're through the Ringed City proper. Oh, what's that? We're skipping right to the good stuff? Sure. Knock Midir off the bridge, a second thing, a third thing, time for the Midir fight. Feels like deja vu, because once again, I do not remember fighting this guy much. Like, I know I've beaten him, like, once, but I honestly have no idea how I did that before. So we're back to the learning curve. Awesome! The big takeaways from my long assault against the dragon probably aren't news to anyone more familiar with this boss. But yeah, stick close to his head to boop his snoot. He really takes well to the snoot boops. Don't be afraid to disengage lock-on, because some of his attacks will take advantage of his massive size and the lock-on's predisposition to turn the character to face the head and leave the unkindled's back to the rest of Midir's body. Looking at you, leaping charge attack. And finally, his massive health pool means it's gonna be a long fight no matter what. So patience is key. Slow, even breaths, unclench your jaw, and prepare for a long, hard ride that's gonna go all night. Okay, with Midir down, we can move on to Half-Light, Spear of the Church. Another NPC fight. We know how this goes. L2 to knock his shield out of the way, riposte, rinse, and repeat. Well, isn't that a big old bag of dicks? Yeah, Half-Light throws in a few problems, including the stupid painting guardians, but more importantly is the speed of his katana swinging, followed up by the fact that any attack while he is shielding will be parried. Takes a while to get a rhythm, but eventually, we sneak some hits in between Half-Light's attacks, quickly burn down his backup, and stunlock the boss into oblivion. We're getting through this pretty quick, but I don't want to make it seem like this was a small speed bump. Half-Light took a solid hour to finally get some good runs on, before finally getting the win. Stopping the Painting Guardians from healing him was probably the biggest reason the run that won made it through to the end. And now, we've finally arrived to my favorite boss in DS3, Slave Knight Gale. Which, to be honest, I don't think FromSoft has managed to outdo since. At least not to my personal taste. This guy is simply too fun. It has been far too long since I've been back in this arena, but hey, we already make it to Phase 2 on our first attempt. Although I'm pretty much entirely out of heals, so I might be cooked. Definitely cooked. Wait, hold on, Gale, ease up. You cook me any harder and I'll be tough and stringy. Alright, let's run that learning curve back one more time. It takes a while, and a lot of deaths, but we eventually learn how to properly dodge his deadliest attacks. That initial run that made it all the way to Phase 2 really gives me a false confidence too, which is quickly corrected as he starts taking me out before we even hit the cutscene trigger a few times. Still, we muscle through our surprisingly low damage, accept a certain amount of damage from trading blows, and make our way through this absolute master of a fight. Perfection. No notes. Time to end this. Okay, final boss time. Soul of Cinder. An amalgamation of every previous Lord of Cinder that has lit the flame, including our own characters in the other games. So this will definitely be a tough challenge. Let's run that curve again. Although, I really got to express exactly how disappointing this fight is for me. I mean, look at this. This is the Soul of Cinder. Cinder! He even has an appropriately high resistance to fire damage, unlike Gwyn. At 35% absorption, it's his highest defensive stat. And yet, here we are, absolutely chunking away at his health, and earning ourselves something we haven't seen since before the DLCs. A first try kill. To show what I mean, let's show exactly how non-optimized my build has actually been. We'll start by testing out a few different options for reshaping the build so that stat scaling comes into effect. First, we can try Hollow, a luck-based build that offers an AR of 462 with purely physical damage, no splitting. Then we've got the Dark Infusion, which scales with both Int and Faith, but we can readjust our levels to hit a whopping 480, although this one is split between physical and dark, leaning more on the dark. Finally, because I don't want to actually go through every single one of these, we can try Lightning, which is fairly fitting with a scaling that focuses mostly on Faith, and gives us an astounding AR of 491. Again, it's split, but this time between physical and lightning, and pretty evenly as well. To compare to what we've been doing up until now, Fire with no scaling maxed out at 423, split evenly between physical and fire. So I decided that Lightning will give the best bang for our buck. We actually die on the first attempt, likely from the false confidence of my first victory, combined with having slightly lower HP and stamina. Still, a second try gets us the win as we absolutely chunk away this dude's health. Like, if we thought the fire version was dealing good damage, this quickly blows it out of the water. And for the sake of being thorough, I also went back with the hollow ass, sounds like the end of a good weekend with the boys, and applied some resins. At this point, our AR jumps up to 550, but I will say that the actual damage output is pretty comparable to the lightning version, even with the resins on. If I had to guess, it's probably because Solar Cinder is weaker to lightning than to physical damage, meaning that the split there actually worked in our favor on the lightning version of the weapon. In that case, do note that the same could probably have been done with some of the other fights that gave us trouble, especially the Demon Prince and Midir. Although, Gale was pretty much always going to muscle through our attacks, no matter what. But of course, I couldn't change to make things easier on myself, because, hot flaming ass. Wrote itself. Yeah, so if it wasn't painfully obvious at this point, the Astora Straight Sword is incredible in DS3. Like an absolute powerhouse of a weapon from beginning to end, and the only struggles I found were from me choosing a suboptimal build, even if that build did give me the opportunity to dump souls into health and stamina. It's everything the weapon should have been back in its first incarnation. And to define the problem with the ass in DS1, it isn't a terrible moveset or low damage from start to finish, as my hyperbolic narration implied in my first video on the subject. It's the massive promise that the weapon has during the early game, only to be a disappointing waste of resources by Quelaag. With a handful of better options available by that point, that not only fills the same niche, but also excels everywhere the ass fails. But this hot flaming ass in DS3? I honestly couldn't ask for a better weapon to suggest for a casual player looking to take a first stab at the game. Eleanor. Hey, it's that time again. The end of the video where I invite folks to come check out the Patreon, link in the description, and make good on the rewards for those currently pledged. Patreon members get early access to new content and their names written in the credits at the end of videos. And those who pledged in the top tiers get their names read out, like our DevBox designers, Genghis Braun, and our DevBox developers, Azul. Thanks for your support, and thanks for watching. So, Editor Proc here again, fresh from the dredges of Extra Life to grab some of the stat numbers that I used for this video. And I've made a bit of a discovery. Turns out that while the weapon I've been using for this entire run is an Astora Straight Sword, it may not be the Astora Straight Sword. Because, turns out, after marrying Henri, I never went back to pick up her weapon, named Henri Straight Sword. This is an alt version of the ass, even retains the same initials, and its flavor text appears to imply that this is the weapon from DS1. Not only is it described as the dullest type of blade, Bazinga, but when I'm not focused on my own salt, it's also claimed to be once the sword of an earnest, noble figure, and specifically upgrades with luck, the stand-in for humanity in DS3, which seems to imply that it was used by the chosen undead from DS1. I'm taking some leaps to make this connection, but when is Dark Souls ever clear enough to make concrete connections? Whether this is the ass from DS1 or not, though, Henri Straight Sword has inherited the Twinkling Titanite upgrade, and the ability to permanently kill skeletons in the catacombs, although it isn't exactly as accessible as it previously was, nor as the new ass is. That being said, it also gains 2 extra benefits. For one, it can be enhanced with resins and spells, which makes it roughly the same strength as the hollow ass that we already tested before. Finally, it has also somehow inherited the ability to heal from the Sanctus Shield. It's slow, and really won't be much help in most fights, but even more additions. And yeah, when our build is centered around this weapon, it performs even better against the Soul of Cinder than the Hollow Ass did. So hey, at least it still fits the bit for this video. Both versions of the ass are so good that they ruin any chance of this challenge run being challenging. Alright, that's all I wanted to add. Bye.